I suppose this just goes to show that anything is fair game when it comes to, well, making games. Even something as mundane as the old job hunt.
And thus we have Careers, a game about having multiple careers, and in so doing earning as much fame, fortune, and felicity — okay, it's happiness, but I didn't feel like breaking the alliteration — as possible. First published by Parker Brothers in 1955, though the copy I have here is from 1971.
You know, I try and keep the show restricted not just to old games, but to ones which are no longer in production, hence the Obscura part of the show's title. But while nothing I can find suggests that Careers is out of print, on the other hand, go into the stores and find me another copy. I mean, I'd certainly never heard of it before stumbling across it in the local antique store. Although in my case it probably doesn't help that I live in the middle of bumfucking nowhere. Plus, the most recent version I could find reference to is from 2008, and even that's more of a throwback to the original version. The most recent new redesign I could find being from 5 years earlier. So while Careers may not technically be out of production, I'd still say it counts as obscure. So let's get into it, shall we?
Yep, that is some 70s box art if ever I've seen it. Very Schoolhouse Rock-esque caricatures going on here, complete with faces which will haunt me in my nightmares. Creep factor aside, the top cover does a somewhat decent job of conveying what you can expect with the game. It's certainly less ambiguous than other versions of the cover I've seen. Meanwhile, the bottom cover, in addition to giving a quick blurb about the gameplay, touts some changes to this particular version of Careers, like a more colorful board and updated career options. Those among you with keen attention to detail have probably spotted a discrepancy at this point.
Yeah, that kind of threw me too. I double-checked, just to make sure I hadn't made a mistake in my research, and yeah, sure enough, the copyright date on the earliest versions of the game is 1955, not 57, so not really sure what the intern that typed this up was smoking that day.
Simplicity is the order of the day for the overall aesthetic of this version of Careers. A fact for which I'm actually very thankful, considering I had to recreate the whole damn kit and caboodle to bring it into Tabletop Simulator. Not because there wasn't a mod already, there was, but it was based on the 50s version, and while the gameplay is essentially the same, there are different occupations and some slightly different flavor text, and for review purposes, I like to have as accurate an experience as possible with these things.
A cursory glance at the game pieces may lead you to suspect that Careers is yet another Monopoly clone, but as we'll see when we get into gameplay, that's not entirely accurate. There are certainly Monopoly influences present, but I think Careers does enough of its own thing to stand out. Oh, and incidentally, just as a side note, disregard the fancy blue dice. The copy I have was missing one of its original dice, and I couldn't find what I did with my normal white ones. Anyway, moving on.
The color scheme for the board can best be described as utilitarian. There are just enough colors present to make the individual spaces stand out, at least on the outer path, and little more than that. There are also smaller inner pathways representing the different occupations of the game, and the spaces on those are all white. Now, the outlines around them do a good enough job of making the individual squares distinct, but I still would have preferred the outlines actually separated the squares, just to make that distinction more clear. That sense of does just what it needs to and not much else extends to the play money, the 2 decks of cards labeled experience cards and opportunity knocks, and even the player tokens. No embellishments whatsoever. There's just enough ink on these things to tell you what they are, and that's it.
You sort of get the feeling there was a budget cut at Parker Brothers when they were making this version of the game. Heck, it would certainly explain the wrong debut date on the back of the box. It's almost like they got lazy in their research and just decided, you know what, no one's going to look at this. Just shoved it out the door as quick as possible. Last thing to talk about is this score sheet, and as you can see, I almost didn't have one to talk about. This is the last one attached to this pad, and even that's been written on. Again, not much to remark about. It's just a simple black and white sheet of paper, yet it at least manages to look more interesting than most of the rest of the components of the board, thanks to all the different notation sections crammed onto it. Setup is just as simplistic as everything else thus far in Careers. First, you take the experience cards and opportunity cards, shuffle them, naturally, and place them in the center of the board, thusly. Then, after making sure you've got the play bunny nice and separated, everyone places their tokens right here on the payday square. There we go, we'll get a 3-player game going. There. Now, Once that's done, you give each player a crisp new $1,000 bill, along with a score sheet. From here, it's up to the player to essentially determine their own win condition by filling in these 3 spaces up here on the top. Once they've done that, they fold over this flap here to keep what they've written here a secret, which caused a bit of a problem for me and my wife when we played, since again, I only had one of these left and that wasn't even blank. So what we ended up doing was just taking a picture of it with our phones and making notes on that.
It got even more complicated in my TTS mod, since you can't even have foldable pieces of paper there. So instead I just gave each player 3 digital counters, one for each blank, and had them draw a hidden zone over the counters to make them invisible to everyone else.
Next, you'll need to appoint a paymaster. They'll be in charge of all the money. And they can either be one of the players already on the board, or you can have a separate player whose sole purpose is just to handle the money. I like that touch. It's a nice way to include people who might not necessarily feel like this type of gameplay is their cup of tea. Last thing to do, roll to see who goes first, with play proceeding clockwise from that player. To begin, let's talk more about this area here at the top of the score sheet. This is a player's success formula, which they need to meet or exceed before anyone else to win the game. Now, they can put any combination of numbers they wish here in the 3 blanks, with the only condition being that they add up to 60 points. Now, success formula consists of fame, which is given by squares on the board with gold stars, happiness, which is given by orange hearts, and money, which you can get in a number of ways, with 1 point being given for every $1,000 you have on hand. So, for instance, if I have, say, anywhere from $5,000 to $5,950, then I have 5 money points.
So that's the goal of the game. Now, how do you go about obtaining said goal? A player's turn consists of throwing both dice and moving the appropriate amount, with doubles doing jack shit as far as extra moves are concerned. You just throw the dice, move, and that's it. When moving along the outer rim of the board, you'll land on one of 4 types of spaces. First, there's the Opportunity Knocks spaces. When you land on one, you draw 1 card from the Opportunity Knocks pile and read it aloud immediately. Then, assuming you don't use it right then and there, you keep it in front of you face up. The blue corner squares are bonus and penalty spaces. Remember how I said there were Monopoly influences present in careers? Well, you can think of Payday as Go, where a player will collect their salary, $1,000 by default, if they pass, or twice their salary if they land on it. The Hawaii Holiday as a sort of free parking, with unemployment and hospital both serving as a type of jail square. The green spaces are special events on which you can gain or lose fame, money, or happiness depending on what you land on and how you play it. But the real crux of the game comes from the white spaces. These are the entrance squares to the titular careers, 8 of them in total, and it's here where the majority of fame and happiness can be earned.
You can get to an entrance square in one of 2 ways. Obviously, you can get there via an exact roll of the dice. However, you can also be sent there by using an opportunity card, which sends you directly to the occupation listed by moving you clockwise around the board, meaning if you pass Payday on the way there, you collect your salary as well. Either way, once you get there, that's all you do for that turn. On your next turn, you take a look at the requirements for entering that particular career path, which will either be paying a certain amount of money, having a particular degree, or previous experience in that career. If you meet the requirements and you decide you want to travel down that path, you do so by rolling only 1 die, and you continue to be limited to 1 die for so long as you're on that path. So let's talk about the careers themselves, and we'll start with college, since it works a little bit differently than the other careers on the board.
Firstly, it's the easiest to get into, only requiring a payment of $500. It's also the shortest path on the board at only 7 spaces. But the major differences come when you complete the college path. Whereas with the other paths you gain a certain amount of experience upon completion, finishing the college path simply gives you a salary increase of $2,000. You then choose which degree you want to earn. The law, engineering, and science degrees can be used to get into different career paths, while the medicine degree, to continue my Monopoly analogy from earlier, serves as a sort of get-out-of-jail-free to the hospital squares jail, though it still doesn't help if you land in unemployment.
Each degree can only be taken once, and then it's unavailable for the rest of the players, meaning if you have a 5 or 6 player game going and all the rest of the degrees have been taken by the time player 5 or 6 goes through college, then they're just stuck with a regular old college degree. Also, the other career paths can be traveled as many times as you want, but each player can only go through college once.
Now on to those other careers. They're quite the varied lot, ranging from your average business tycoon, which for me is the first thing that comes to mind when I hear the word career, right up to being an astronaut. And as the box mentions, some of these have been updated from previous versions in keeping with the era, with older iterations having careers like farming, going to sea, or uranium prospecting. Wait, what? Seriously? The first thing you'll notice is that some career paths are more suited to collecting one particular component of your success formula than others. Also, you can gain more than just fame, money, or happiness, with some squares having you draw opportunity or experience cards, while some spaces can penalize you in some ways. As with college, you'll need to meet the listed requirements if you want to enter a certain path, the difference here being once you complete that path.
If it's your first time completing a career, then you mark it down on your score sheet next to that career under the 1 column, and you draw 1 experience card. Now, experience cards, like their opportunity counterparts, take the place of dice rolls. However, in this case, they allow you to move a specific number of spaces. Good for landing on that one space that you really want to hit, or bypassing one that you'd rather avoid altogether. Once you play either an experience or an opportunity card, you return it to the bottom of the appropriate deck.
Back to the careers, if you've completed a path for a second time, you mark it under the 2 column and draw 2 experience cards, and for your third time, mark it under 3 and collect 3 cards.
After 3 times, you gain the privilege of retirement, which means at any time you can move from any square on the board, barring hospital and unemployment, to the Hawaii Holiday Square, which is a good way to rack up happiness. And again, you do so by moving clockwise around the board, so passing payday nets you your salary as well.
You can, if you wish, keep going down one career path more than 3 times, but completing it any more than 3 times still only nets you 3 experience cards.
And I stress that word completion, since you only gain these benefits if you go all the way down a career path and return to the outer track via the exit square. And there are plenty of ways to leave a career path without actually completing it.
As mentioned, there are several squares that penalize you, some by sending you straight to unemployment or hospital. You could, if you wanted to, abandon one path in favor of another via the use of an opportunity card, or if you've earned retirement privileges, you can go straight to Hawaii. Then there's bumping.
If you should land on a space already occupied by another player, you can, if you wish, bump that player straight to unemployment, unless the two of you can maybe work out a satisfactory deal to allow the other player to stay, either through payment or trade of experience or opportunity cards, which, I should add, can happen at any point during the game if you wish, not just during a bump situation, but you cannot trade happiness or fame points. One more Monopoly influence comes in the form of bankruptcy. And like the former game, if you get in a situation that requires that you pay more money than you have, assuming you can't raise those funds via trading or borrowing, then you can declare bankruptcy. However, in careers, it's not necessarily the end of the game for you. Here, when you declare bankruptcy, you simply turn in your cash and cards and you start fresh with a $1,000 bill, $1,000 salary, and a new scorecard. It's more akin to how it works in real life and is quite forgiving in that regard. The first player to achieve their success formula, that is, to meet or exceed all 3 of the numbers they put in these blanks at the start, wins the game. And as I found out, that can be easier said than done. Because remember, it's not just a matter of picking the right paths. You're also at the mercy of the dice, assuming you don't have an experience card or 2 handy. When my wife and I played the game, I tried 4 times to get into the teaching path because the first 3 times I rolled a 1 and I got sent to the hospital for my troubles.
Nonetheless, I like the success formula mechanic. It ensures that repeated game sessions don't get too formulaic, pun intended, and keeps things fresh, as does the suggestion in the manual for a team-based variation. Still, it can be somewhat time-consuming trying to cross the threshold of one of your formula components while aggravatingly racking up points in the other 2. Especially if someone starts hogging all the opportunity cards. That's kind of why I had to tilt my head at the bit in the instructions, which suggests that for a 2-player game you should up the success formula total to 100. Yeah, no.
Speaking of things in the instructions to tilt your head at, I've got to share what's probably my favorite part of the whole manual. Special notes. Sometimes situations arise which are not directly covered by the rules. The rules will not proceed to cover those situations. Great consistency there.
The special notes section has got to be the most useless part of the entire instruction booklet, even putting aside the opening statement's self-contradiction, because in some cases it's a flat-out lie, since items like Note C about not allowing the trade of fame or happiness points, and Note K about the paymaster having to keep his money separate from the bank if they're playing the game, are actually covered in the rules. Note D about what happens when you land on the Las Vegas square uses way too many words in an attempt to clarify how to play that space, And most of the rest of the notes generally just should have had their own section in the rules and not just be shunted to the back in a glorified "in the unlikely event of" section. Now let me tell you some actual situations which arose that weren't covered by the rules, and as a result my players and I had to come up with some house rules. The instructions state that an opportunity card should be read aloud upon drawing one, in case a player decides to use it then and there, but if they don't, they should keep it face up in front of them so that other players can see them. But what about experience cards? We're told they can't be played on the same turn they're obtained, since they take the place of a dice roll, so what do you do with them in the meantime? Are you meant to keep them face up like the opportunity cards, or keep them secret? Everyone I played with decided to keep them face up, since that seemed to make sense, but it would have been nice to have that clarification. In another self-contradictory paragraph, the manual tells us that when it comes to entering a career path, if a player cannot meet at least one of the listed requirements, they cannot enter and should continue around the outer track. But it then goes on to say that if a player moves to an entrance square via an opportunity card, they must enter.
But what if you can't? What if I decide, you know what, I'm going to use an opportunity card and go into space, only for my next turn to roll around and I realize, oh crap, I don't have $5,000 or an engineering degree or prior space experience. What then? The instructions only say I must enter, but what if I can't? Do I still enter and lose points due to not meeting the requirements? Do I enter without penalty? Or do I just operate based on the previous statement and move along? Eventually, my TTS players and I decided to go with that last option, with the consensus that having wasted an opportunity card due to lack of attention was probably penalty enough.
And speaking of the opportunity cards, some of them will send you to college. But as we've discussed earlier, each player can only enter college once, so once everyone's graduated, what happens to those particular cards? Should they be taken out of the game entirely? Traded into the bank for monetary value? Just put back in the deck?
Basically, the instructions exhibit the same symptoms of apparent laziness in presentation as most of the rest of the game. And yeah, little details like that might not mean much on the surface, but they can lead to needless ambiguity that just gets in the way of everything else. And at the end of the day, I'm playing a game to play a game. I shouldn't have to worry about writing the rules as well.
But as half-assed as the presentation may be, the gameplay is of course the major factor, and that, thankfully, is quite enjoyable. Again, much of that comes from the variety offered by the success formula mechanic, and while there are touches of Monopoly sprinkled throughout the game, thankfully, friendship-destroying aggravation is not one of those touches, as here in Careers, when you get screwed over, it's either you or the dice doing it to you, not your friends. Unless maybe one of them has bumped you and is being particularly stubborn in negotiations. The rules, whether intentional or not, are quite forgiving, flexible, as shown with the team-based variant, and open to people who might not want to play per se, but still participate with the Paymaster rules.
This would normally be the point where I'd ponder if the game should be brought back and what changes I'd make to it if it were, but as discussed at the start of the video, for all I know, Careers may indeed still be alive and kicking. So I'd say, if you find a copy, no matter which version it is, yeah, go ahead, pick it up. And so ends another glimpse into board game Obscura. Hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to doing it again next time. Jikai made. Sayonara.